The world as I knew it shattered into a cacophony of sound and light. It was a vicious, unyielding intrusion on the quiet peace of my home. The flashing red and blue strobed through the windows, a malevolent disco ball painting our living room in violent, shifting hues. A frantic, guttural pounding on the front door. "Open up, police!" A young, angry voice filled with a certainty that had no place in my 70 years of life. Then the lock splintered, a sound of wood giving way that felt like a blow to my own chest. Two figures in dark blue uniforms filled the doorway, their faces hard and unyielding. One of them, a fresh-faced boy with a thin mustache, was already on the attack. He grabbed my arm, his grip like a steel vice wrenching me forward. I stumbled the air, leaving my lungs in a startled gasp. "Don't you touch him?" Helen's voice, a scream I barely recognized, cut through the noise. She was a small, frail woman, but in that moment, she had the ferocity of a lioness protecting her cub. The officer shoved me hard against the doorframe, the wood digging into my back. My knees buckled. I saw the fear in Helen's eyes, a fear that mirrored my own, and in that moment, all the years of quiet dignity I had built seemed to turn to dust. But it didn't start that way. Just a few hours earlier, the world was a different place. It was a world made of soft light and the gentle rhythm of a life well lived. The sun was a warm golden promise spreading over the porch, chasing away the morning chill. I sat on our old porch swing, the chain creaking, a familiar, comforting tune that had become the soundtrack of my retirement. The swing itself was a relic, a gift from Helen on our 30th anniversary. Its paint was faded, chipped in places, but the wood was smooth and worn to fit the contours of my body. It was a good swing, a swing for thinking, a swing for remembering. I watched the street slowly come to life. Mrs. Gable, 2 houses down, was watering her prize-winning petunias. Mr. Henderson was meticulously wiping down his Ford F-150, a ritual he performed every Saturday. The scent of coffee drifted from the kitchen window where I knew Helen would be making her morning brew. Everything was in its right place. Everything was as it should be. My name is William Johnson, but most folks call me Bill. I'm 71 years old, a retired Navy man who spent his best years fixing engines and sailing the open seas. I left the service with an honorable discharge, a few scars, and a mind full of memories, good and bad. Helen and I moved into this house 40 years ago, a little bungalow on a quiet street in a part of town that was still mostly families and neighbors who knew each other by name. We raised our son David here. He chased fireflies in this yard, learned to ride his bike on this sidewalk, and had his first crush on the girl next door. This place holds a lifetime. But a lifetime leaves its marks not just on the swing's faded paint, but on the soul as well. The quiet of retirement, which I had once longed for, had a way of turning into a profound stillness, a kind of emotional emptiness. The days flowed into each other, a gentle river with no rapids, no sudden turns. They were peaceful, but sometimes a man needs more than just peace. He needs purpose. He needs connection. The morning was perfect, and yet I felt the familiar ache of an empty space. It wasn't an empty house. Helen was inside, humming a tune as she prepared breakfast. It was an emptiness of heart, an echo of the past. The swing creaked again as I gently pushed off the porch floor, the rhythm a perfect metaphor for my life, a steady, repetitive motion that didn't really get me anywhere. "Penny for your thoughts, old man." I turned to see Helen in the doorway, a mug of coffee in her hands. She was still as beautiful to me as the day I first met her. Her smile warmed the lines around her eyes, a testament to the laughter we had shared. Her hair was a crown of silver, and she held herself with a quiet grace that had always grounded me. I smiled, a genuine smile that reached my eyes. "Just thinking about how good this coffee smells, and how lucky I am to have you." She laughed softly, the sound like the tinkling of wind chimes. "Don't you lie to me, Bill Johnson. I know that look. You were a million miles away, thinking about David again." The smile faltered. She knew me too well. I took the mug from her, the warmth of the ceramic a comfort in my hands. "A little. It's been a while since we've heard from him. He called last week," she said gently, her hand resting on my shoulder. "You were asleep. He left a message, said he was busy but that he loved us." I nodded, taking a long sip of the coffee. The message was a brief, cheerful voicemail that I had listened to a dozen times. "Yeah, I heard it. Just seems so far away, doesn't he? A Marine Corps officer. All that responsibility. He's not our little boy anymore. He's a good man, Bill, a proud man. He gets that from you. She squeezed my shoulder. My pride in David was boundless. He had joined the Marine Corps right out of college, a decision that had surprised us both. He was a bright kid, had his pick of jobs, but he felt a calling to serve. I understood it from one man who had worn a uniform to another. But understanding didn't make the distance any easier. I remembered the day he left a tall, confident young man in his dress blues, hugging us goodbye on this very porch. That day felt like a farewell to a part of my own life, a chapter that had closed forever. The morning went on. We ate a simple breakfast of scrambled eggs and toast, the silence between us, a comfortable one, filled with the hum of the refrigerator and the gentle clinking of silverware. We talked about Mrs. Gable's petunias, about the new car that had just moved in down the street, and about the weather report. Everything was ordinary. Everything was normal. But beneath the surface of that normal, a different kind of life was brewing. The neighborhood wasn't as simple as it used to be. There were new faces, new attitudes. A few weeks ago, a police car had driven by, slowly, too slowly, the young officer inside, giving me a long, hard stare as I mowed the lawn. It was a look I hadn't seen in a long time. A look that said, "I'm watching you." It had made my stomach tighten, a cold, unfamiliar feeling of unease. I had told myself I was being paranoid. Just an old man getting jumpy. I walked to the living room and picked up the framed photo on the mantelpiece. It was a picture of David, a recent one, in his full dress uniform, his face serious and strong. He looked so much like me at his age, but with a different kind of fire in his eyes. A modern fire. I traced the edge of the frame with my thumb, the glass cool beneath my touch. I missed him. I missed the sound of his laughter echoing through the house. I missed the way he used to bring home strange creatures he found in the woods, proudly showing me a frog or a snake. I missed the feeling of knowing he was just down the hall, a safe, constant presence. The sun was high in the sky, now casting long shadows across the yard. The day was reaching its peaceful, predictable peak. I had just put the picture back on the mantelpiece when I heard the sound. Distant at first, a faint wail that made me pause. It grew louder, more insistent, a siren cutting through the calm of our street. It wasn't the sound of an ambulance rushing to a distant emergency. This one was getting closer. Much closer. I walked to the front window and my heart dropped into my stomach. The red and blue lights were flashing at the end of our street, growing larger with every second. 2 patrol cars. They weren't just passing by. They were turning onto our street. They were coming for us. And I felt it then, the same chill I had felt a few weeks ago, the same tightening in my gut. The quiet of my peaceful life was about to be broken, and I had a terrible feeling it wouldn't be fixed by the morning's coffee or the creaking of an old swing. This was different. This was wrong. And I was alone. The chill from the end of my last thought, the gut-wrenching feeling of being watched, didn't vanish with the sunrise. It lingered, a low-grade fever in the back of my mind, tainting the otherwise sweet taste of my morning coffee. It felt like a small crack in a beautiful porcelain bowl. You know it's there, you try to ignore it, but your finger keeps finding the imperfection. This feeling was the new normal, a quiet hum of unease beneath the gentle rhythm of our days. Our days were an exercise in routine, a carefully choreographed dance that had grown more deliberate with each passing year. I would wake before the sun make the coffee and sit on the porch swing for my morning reflections. Helen would join me after a while, bringing with her the scent of toast and the gentle warmth of her presence. Then we'd eat. Simple food, simple conversation. "Did you remember to take your pills, Bill?" she'd ask, and I'd nod. "Did you call the plumber about the slow drain?" I'd counter, and she'd smile, a hint of exasperation in her eyes. "I did. He said he'd be here sometime next week. Don't you worry about it." After breakfast, our paths diverged. Helen would head to the small garden in the backyard, her sanctuary, a place filled with the vibrant colors and smells of her prize-winning roses. I would take my daily walk. It was a ritual, a habit that began after my doctor told me I needed to keep my blood pressure in check. I'd walk the same route every day, down to the corner, around the block, and back up the street. It was an unremarkable, quiet walk. I'd wave to Mr. Henderson as he polished his truck, tip my hat to Mrs. Gable as she clipped her petunias, and exchange a few pleasantries with the mailman. It was a small, familiar world, and for the most part, it was a good world. But on these walks, the void felt its deepest. The houses I passed, the children I saw playing in the yards, the young couples walking hand in hand. They were all small, constant reminders of what I had, and what I had lost. I hadn't lost my family, not in the way most people think. Helen was right here, the love of my life. David was alive, serving his country a phone call away. But the physical distance, the profound chasm of space and time, had created a kind of emotional chasm as well. The phone, a sleek smartphone that David had insisted we get, was the physical manifestation of that distance. It sat on the kitchen counter, a silent black rectangle that held all the promise and all the disappointment of modern connection. I'd pick it up a dozen times a day just to look at the screen. Not to call anyone, just to see if a notification had popped up. My finger would hover over David's contact, the small picture of him in his dress uniform. His smile a little too formal, a little too perfect. I'd want to press it, to hear his voice, to just say hello. But I never did. I knew the reasons, of course. They were the same old reasons that every parent of an adult child knows. He was a busy man, a Marine Corps officer. He had responsibilities far more important than an old man's loneliness. I didn't want to be a bother. I didn't want him to hear the tremor in my voice, the unspoken longing that I knew would betray me. So I'd put the phone back down. I'd wait. Sometimes he would call. Those were the best days. The phone would ring and my heart would leap into my throat. The screen would flash David, and a jolt of pure, unadulterated joy would course through me. The conversation would be brief, of course. "Hey, Dad. Just a quick call. I'm okay. How's Mom? How are you guys?" And then it would be over. A whirlwind of hurried phrases and clipped military politeness. I knew it wasn't his fault. It was the life he had chosen. It was the world he now inhabited, a world a million miles away from my porch swing and Helen's roses. Other times I would get a text message. A quick terse, "Thinking of you guys," or "Hope you're doing well." These were small flickering candles of connection in a vast dark room. I would read them and reread them, trying to parse every syllable, every punctuation mark to find the hidden emotion, the boy who used to build sandcastles on the beach and tell me all his secrets. But the messages were too brief, too efficient. They were not for an old man who needed to feel the warmth of his son's presence. They were for a soldier who had 1,000 other things on his mind. Then there were the voicemails. These were the hardest. They would be left on days he called when I was in the garden or on the porch swing, and I didn't get to the phone in time. His voice, strong and deep, would echo from the speaker. "Hey, Dad, it's me. Just calling to say hi. Hope you're doing okay. Talk to you soon." The sound of his voice was a comfort, a bittersweet melody that made my chest ache. I would play them over and over until the words were etched into my mind, until I could hear his voice even when the phone was silent. But the voicemails, like the texts, were a constant reminder of the gap between us. A symbol of the moments we had missed, the moments we would never get back. I remember one night many years ago when David was just a teenager. He had been having trouble with a girl at school, a silly, heartbreaking first love. I was sitting on the porch swing just like I am now, and he had come out and sat beside me. For an hour he had talked not to me but to the night itself, pouring out all his teenage angst and confusion. I hadn't said a word, just listened. And when he was finished, he had looked at me, his eyes full of gratitude, and said, "Thanks, Dad. It helps just to talk." That night was a sacred memory, a moment of profound connection that had forged a bond between us. Now I yearned for that kind of connection, but the phone, that sleek black rectangle, felt like a barrier, a modern, efficient wall between a father and his son. Helen noticed my melancholy, of course. She always did. Her love was a quiet, constant presence like the sun on a summer day. It was just always there. We were sitting at the dinner table one night, a simple meal of chicken and potatoes. The silence between us, once a comfortable companion, had taken on a new, heavy quality. "You're thinking about him again, aren't you?" she asked, her voice soft. I looked up from my plate. "I am. It's just, I wish he would call. For real. Not just a voicemail. I wish I could hear about his day. About the little things. Not just the big, important things." She reached across the table and took my hand. Her skin was soft and warm, a gentle contrast to my gnarled, scarred hands. "He's a good boy, Bill. He's doing what he thinks is right. We should be proud." "I am proud," I said, my voice heavy with emotion. "I'm so proud. I miss him." The boy who was so excited to show me his first frog. The boy who asked me to teach him how to tie a proper knot. The boy who sat on the swing and told me about his girl problems. She nodded, her eyes glistening. She missed him too. We were two old ships anchored together in a quiet harbor, but we both felt the pull of the open sea, the pull of a life that had moved on without us. The days continued to pass, each one a slow, measured beat. We went to the market, and I noticed the new car again, a dark sedan with tinted windows parked a little too close to the corner. On my walk, the same police car from before passed by the young officer inside, giving me a long, cold stare. I told myself it was nothing. I was an old man, and old men get jumpy. But the feeling that low-grade fever only grew stronger. It was a premonition, a warning. The quiet of our days was a lie, a thin veneer of peace that was about to be shattered. I didn't know how or when. I just knew it was coming. I was a Marine. I had seen the look on a man's face before a storm, and that storm was gathering on my street. The flashing lights filled our living room, a garish, surreal painting that turned our peaceful home into a carnival of fear. The siren cut off abruptly, leaving an unnerving silence in its wake, a silence more menacing than the sound itself. I stood at the window, frozen, watching two figures in dark blue uniforms step out of their patrol cars. They moved with a deliberate, confident swagger, their black boots crunching on the gravel of our driveway. There were two of them. One was older, a man with a tired face and a thick mustache, his posture heavy and resigned. The other was younger, maybe in his late 20s, with a lean, aggressive build and a jaw that looked perpetually clenched. He walked with a casual insolence, his hand resting on the hilt of his service pistol, a gesture that felt both theatrical and deeply menacing. I turned away from the window, my heart hammering against my ribs. Helen was standing by the couch, her hands clasped tightly together, her knuckles white. Her face was pale, and her eyes, usually so full of warmth, were wide with a fear I hadn't seen since the first time we had to rush David to the emergency room for stitches. "Helen, stay calm," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I tried to sound like the man who had commanded a crew of engineers on the open sea, but I knew I sounded like an old man trying to reassure his wife. "It's probably just a mistake. Maybe they're looking for someone." She just nodded, unable to speak. The first heavy rap on the door, a series of sharp, decisive blows that reverberated through the house, made her jump. I walked to the door, my mind racing. 1,000 possibilities flashed through my head. Had something happened to David? Was there a fire? But the cold, hard certainty in the pounding told me this wasn't an emergency. This was an inspection, an accusation. I opened the door, a reflex I had performed 1,000 times for friends and family. But this time, it felt different. It felt like I was opening the door to the unknown. The older officer spoke first, his voice a flat monotone. "William Johnson, we're conducting an area security check. Can we ask you a few questions?" I nodded, trying to maintain my composure. "Yes, officer. My name is Bill. What can I help you with?" The younger officer, his eyes darting around my front porch with an undisguised air of suspicion, spoke next. His voice was laced with a sneer I felt immediately in my gut. "Routine check, old-timer. There's been an increase in suspicious activity in the area. Just making sure everything's on the up and up." I bristled at the term old-timer. I had spent 20 years in the Navy, served my country with honor, and was a law-abiding citizen. I was a man of dignity, and this kid was treating me like I was a suspect in my own home. I looked at his name tag. Officer Carter. The name was as sharp and unpleasant as the look in his eyes. "Suspicious activity. What kind of activity?" I asked, my voice now a little colder. Officer Carter just shrugged a dismissive gesture. "Just some reports, people who don't belong here. We've got to make sure everything's copacetic." I felt the blood drain from my face. Copacetic. The word was like a knife twisting in an old wound. It was a word I had heard 100 times in the service, a word that meant everything was fine. But the way he said it, with that slow, deliberate drawl, it meant something entirely different. It meant that I was the problem. That my wife and I, two people who had lived in this house for 40 years, were the people who don't belong here. Helen, sensing the shift in my mood, stepped forward, her hand on my arm. "We've been here for a long time, officer. We're good neighbors. We don't cause any trouble." The older officer, whose name tag read Officer Davis, looked at Helen with a flicker of something that might have been pity or boredom. He just nodded and looked back at me. "Do you mind if we take a look around, sir? Just a quick walk around the property. Make sure there's nothing out of the ordinary." A quick walk around the property. A phrase that seemed innocuous enough. But the way Officer Carter was staring at our garden at the fence at the open door of our garage, it didn't feel like a walk. It felt like a search. I knew my rights. I didn't have to let them in without a warrant. But I also knew the way things worked. The way a refusal could turn a routine check into a full-blown investigation. The way a quiet day could turn into a living nightmare. "We have nothing to hide." I said, a decision that felt both brave and foolish. "Go ahead. The backyard is through the side gate." Officer Davis nodded again, a look of weary relief on his face. Officer Carter, however, just smirked. It was a small, almost imperceptible curl of his lip, but it spoke volumes. He had gotten what he wanted. He had gotten inside our bubble. They walked around the house, their heavy boots a loud echo on our driveway. Helen and I stood in the doorway watching them. Officer Davis walked with a purpose, checking the gate, glancing at the shed. Officer Carter, on the other hand, was like a cat in a new room, his eyes scanning everything, lingering on our lawn decorations, a gnome Helen had painted and placed next to a bird bath. He picked it up, examined it, and put it back down with a sharp, careless clatter. It felt like a desecration, a violation of our small personal world. He came back to the front of the house and looked at me again, his eyes holding a look of challenge. "You a veteran, sir?" he asked, his tone dripping with false respect. I hesitated. My Navy days were a source of immense pride. I had fought for this country, for the right to live in my home in peace. But in that moment, telling him felt like I was giving him a weapon. I said, my voice firm. "Retired. 20 years of service." Officer Carter's smirk widened. "A vet, huh? That's good. My daddy was a vet. He always told me that you could spot the good ones from a mile away." The veiled insult was so subtle, so perfectly placed, that it took me a moment to process it. He was not just insulting me. He was insulting my entire service, my entire life. He was saying, without saying it, that I was one of the bad ones. I felt a hot, white-hot rage begin to bubble up in my chest. This wasn't a security check. This was a power play. This was harassment. "Is there a reason for this, officer?" I asked, my voice low and dangerous. "Or are you just enjoying your little tour?" Officer Carter's eyes narrowed. The pretense of civility was gone. He took a step closer, his body language, aggressive, challenging. "Just a check, old-timer. Nothing to see here? Yet." He let the last word hang in the air, a silent, menacing threat. "You guys have a nice day." He turned on his heel and walked back to the car, leaving the lingering scent of stale coffee and cheap cologne in his wake. Officer Davis, who had stood silently through the whole exchange, gave me a small, almost apologetic nod before following his partner. The two of them got in their cars, and with a roar of their engines, they sped away, the flashing lights disappearing around the corner. The silence that was left behind was not the peaceful quiet of our normal mornings. It was a different kind of quiet, a broken quiet, a silence filled with the echoes of their boots on our gravel, the sound of their sneering voices, and the bitter taste of a dignity that had been challenged and found wanting. Helen was crying, small, silent tears running down her face. She wrapped her arms around herself, trembling. I pulled her into my arms, holding her tightly, but I felt a profound sense of helplessness. I had faced storms at sea. I had faced hostile combat zones. But I had never felt so vulnerable, so afraid as I did in my own home, in my own front yard. I had been a protector all my life. I had worn a uniform, carried a weapon, and stood ready to defend my country. But in the face of this insidious, hateful power, I was just an old man. And I knew with a terrible certainty that this was just the beginning. The quiet that settled over our house after the police left was not the comfortable silence of our routine. It was the oppressive, heavy quiet that follows a storm, a stillness filled with the tension of what had just passed and the dread of what was to come. Helen and I moved about our home like ghosts. The kitchen, once a place of warm smells and gentle conversation, now felt cold and sterile. The living room, with its faded furniture and framed photos, felt like a museum of a life we no longer had. The memory of Officer Carter's sneer and the cold, unblinking stare of Officer Davis was a physical presence in every room. Our sanctuary had been invaded, and the enemy was now living in the silence between our breaths. The harassment began slowly, like a slow-moving tide that imperceptibly erodes the shore. It wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It was something far more insidious, a constant low-grade psychological assault. The first time it was just a patrol car driving past our house a little too slowly, the young officer's face a blur of white beneath the brim of his hat. He was looking at our house, not at us, but at our house as if cataloging its every detail. The second time it was the same thing, but this time he gave a long, deliberate stare at our front porch, at the very swing I had spent so many peaceful mornings on. It was a silent, menacing gesture, a way of saying, "We're still here. We haven't forgotten." Helen noticed it too. She would be tending to her roses, and I would see her stop her hands hovering over a perfect bloom, her gaze fixed on the street. Her body would tense a small, involuntary movement of fear, and she would wait until the car had passed. Then she would go back to her gardening, her movements a little more frantic, a little less graceful. We never spoke about it. The fear was a quiet, uninvited guest that sat at our dinner table that lay between us in the bed at night. Then came the next visit. It was a Tuesday, a warm, humid day that promised a summer thunderstorm. The doorbell rang, a sound that now sent a jolt of pure panic through my system. I opened the door to find Officer Carter and Officer Davis again standing on our porch. Carter had a clipboard in his hand, a prop in this little play of theirs. "Mr. Johnson." Carter said, his voice a mocking echo of the older officer's earlier tone. "Just following up on our previous conversation. We've had a few reports of code violations on this street. Just a quick check to make sure everything's up to par." A code violation. It was such a ridiculous, flimsy excuse. Our lawn was meticulously kept. Our house was in perfect order. Helen and I prided ourselves on our home. A code violation? What kind? I asked, my voice a little unsteady. Carter looked down at his clipboard, his face a mask of false seriousness. "Well, there's a report of an unauthorized structure in your backyard, and also some reports of, let's see here, inappropriate lawn ornaments." He looked at me, a tiny condescending smirk playing on his lips. "Is that a gnome next to your bird bath, sir?" I felt the blood rush to my head. That gnome was Helen's. She had painted it herself, a silly, cheerful little thing that brought her immense joy. It was a symbol of her quiet, happy life, and this boy was standing here mocking it. "It's a garden gnome, officer," I said, my voice dangerously low. "My wife painted it." Carter just chuckled, a short, unpleasant sound. "Well, let's just make sure there aren't any other inappropriate decorations back there. We'll just need to take a quick look." This time I stood my ground. "You've already walked around the property, officer. You saw everything there was to see. We have nothing else to show you." Carter's eyes narrowed. "Look, old man, we're just trying to do our job. You're making this difficult. A simple walk around the yard and we can be on our way. Unless you've got something to hide." The implication was so clear, so perfectly aimed, that it took my breath away. He was not asking for a tour. He was demanding a search using the flimsiest of pretenses, and he was implying that my refusal was proof of guilt. This wasn't about a code violation. This was about power. It was about control. Helen, who had been standing behind me, stepped forward, her voice a fragile, trembling plea. "Please, officer, we are just an old couple. We don't have anything. We just want to be left alone." Carter ignored her completely. He looked right through her as if she were a ghost. He kept his eyes fixed on me, a silent, menacing challenge. The disdain, the absolute lack of respect was a knife in my gut. He didn't see a woman. He saw a nuisance. He saw an old black woman who had no right to speak to him, no right to ask him to leave her alone. "My wife asked you to leave, officer," I said, my voice now a slow, deliberate steel. "We have nothing to hide, but we also have a right to privacy. And you have no warrant." Officer Davis, who had been standing silently in the background, shifted his weight. "He's right, Carter. We can't go in without a warrant." He said it without emotion, without any real conviction. It was a technicality, not a moral objection. Carter's jaw clenched. He was angry. I had dared to use my knowledge, my rights, to challenge his authority. He put his clipboard down and leaned forward, his voice a low, hostile whisper. "You think you're a tough guy, old man, using your little legal words. Don't get too comfortable. This is just the beginning." He straightened up, a look of pure malice on his face. "We'll be seeing you around." And with that, they were gone. The doorbell stopped ringing, the cars sped off, and the silence returned. But it was a silence that was now filled with the echo of his threat. "This is just the beginning." The words had sunk into the very foundations of our home, poisoning the air we breathed. Helen was sobbing now, a quiet, guttural sound of pure terror. I held her, but I felt a profound sense of failure. I couldn't protect her. I had stood up for her, but my words, my defiance, had only made things worse. I had challenged their authority, and I had a terrible feeling that they would come back with something far worse than a clipboard and a sneer. I spent the next few days in a state of hyper-awareness. Every car that drove by, every footstep on the sidewalk, every shadow that crossed our window, it all sent a jolt of fear through me. I couldn't sit on the porch swing anymore. It felt too exposed. I would stand by the living room window, pulling the curtains back just a fraction, watching. My home, the place that had always been my sanctuary, had become a prison. A place where I was constantly on guard, constantly waiting for the next knock on the door, the next subtle act of harassment. I thought about David, about his strength, his training, his uniform. I imagined him standing on our porch, his face calm and unyielding, telling those two officers exactly where they could go. I thought about calling him. Just a simple call. "Hello, son. We need you." But a profound sense of shame held me back. He was a Marine. He was a protector. He had a duty, a mission. And what was my mission? To hide in my own home, afraid of two local cops. It felt weak. It felt pathetic. And I couldn't bring myself to burden him with my weakness. I had always been the strong one, the one who solved problems. And now I was a failure. An old man who couldn't even protect his wife from the enemy in his own home. The days bled into a blur of fear. The low-grade fever of anxiety I had felt was now a full-blown sickness, and it had consumed our home. The police car no longer just drove by. It became a fixture on our street. Sometimes it would park directly across from our house, the young Officer Carter, a motionless statue behind the tinted glass, his eyes a cold, unwavering presence. Other times they would come to the door not with a pretense of a security check anymore, but with a more direct, more hostile challenge. "Mr. Johnson," Officer Carter said one afternoon, his voice a low, hostile growl. "We got a report about a stolen vehicle in the area. Did you happen to see a blue sedan, late 80s model, driving around?" It was a ridiculous question. Our neighborhood was full of old cars, but the way he was looking at me, the way his eyes lingered on my garage door, it wasn't a question. It was a veiled accusation. He was daring me to challenge him, to question his authority. Helen, her face pale, tried to step in. "Officer, we haven't seen anything. We haven't left the house all day." Carter ignored her. He looked right through her. His gaze locked on me. He wanted my reaction. He wanted a confrontation. And I knew, with a terrible certainty, that a confrontation was what he was waiting for. It would be my word against his. An old black man's word against a white officer's. I knew how that story ended. I had seen it 100 times on the news, in the history books, and the stories my own father had told me. So I swallowed my pride. I swallowed my rage. I just shook my head. "No, officer. We haven't seen anything." He stared at me for a long, uncomfortable moment, a silent challenge. Then a slow, ugly smirk spread across his face. "Okay, old-timer. Have a nice day." He and his partner got back in their car and sped off, the sound of their tires a screech of victory on the asphalt. The harassment continued. One morning, we found a broken bottle in our front yard. Another time, someone had spray-painted a single ugly word on our mailbox, a word so vile I wouldn't dare repeat it to Helen. We tried to clean it off, but the stain remained a permanent mark on our home. These were not random acts of vandalism. They were calculated, deliberate acts of terror. They were designed to remind us that we were not safe, that our peace was an illusion. And I felt a profound, deep-seated shame. I had spent my life as a protector, as a man who could handle any situation. But in the face of this insidious, hateful power, I was a failure. It was on one of these quiet, terror-filled afternoons that the phone rang. The sound of it, a gentle, cheerful chime, was a startling intrusion on the heavy silence of our home. I looked at the caller ID and my heart gave a painful lurch. It was David. A rush of emotions, a violent storm of hope and shame washed over me. I wanted to hear his voice, to tell him everything, to ask for his help. I wanted to be that father, the strong, brave father he remembered who would protect his family from any harm. But the shame was too great. The lie was already on my tongue. I cleared my throat, forcing a smile onto my face that I knew he couldn't see. "Hello," I said, my voice sounding a little too cheerful, a little too false. "Hey, Dad, how's it going?" David's voice was a burst of sunshine on a stormy day. He sounded so young, so full of life and purpose. I could hear the faint sound of military life in the background, the distant shouts and the hum of machinery. My heart ached with pride and with a profound, terrible shame. "It's going great, son, just great." I said a lie that felt like a poison. "Beautiful day here. I just finished mowing the lawn. It looks fantastic." I went on piling lie upon lie, talking about the roses in Helen's garden, about the way the neighborhood looked so peaceful, about the delicious dinner we had planned for that night. I was a professional storyteller, crafting a perfect, beautiful world that did not exist. "That's great, Dad," he said, and I could hear the genuine relief in his voice. "I was a little worried about you guys. I know the news can be, well, you know." "We're fine, son," I said a little too quickly. "Don't you worry about us. You just focus on your job. You're a Marine. You've got important things to worry about. We're just two old people enjoying our retirement." The words felt like a betrayal. I was telling him that our fear, our terror was not important. I was telling him that our suffering was a trivial thing that didn't deserve his attention. I was telling him that he should forget about us, that he should focus on the real world, the world of soldiers and duty and honor. "Okay, Dad," he said, a note of hesitation in his voice. "Just, if you guys ever need anything, anything at all, you just call me, okay? I can be home in a heartbeat." "We will, son. We will," I lied, my voice cracking a little. "We'll call you. But we're fine. We're really fine." After the call ended, I felt a deep, profound sense of isolation. The lie had not protected us. It had built a wall between me and my own son. I had sealed myself off, sealed Helen off from the one person who could help. I had chosen to bear this burden alone, not out of strength, but out of a profound and terrible shame. That night, the shame manifested in a different way. It turned to anger. Not at the police, but at Helen. At myself. We were sitting at the dinner table, the same dinner table where we had once shared our joys and our dreams. The silence between us, which was once so comforting, was now a source of unbearable tension. I picked at my food, my stomach in a tight knot. "Why didn't you tell him?" she asked, her voice a fragile whisper. "You had a chance. You could have told him everything. Tell him what Helen—" I snapped, the anger I had been holding in all day finally boiling over. "That we're so weak that we can't handle a couple of local cops. That his old man is a coward who can't even protect his own wife. What good would that do?" "He's our son Bill," she said, her voice rising in a rare moment of anger. "He loves us. He would have helped. Why are you doing this?" "Because I'm his father." I shouted, the words bursting out of me in a torrent of pain. "Because I'm supposed to be the one who protects him, not the other way around." I slammed my fist on the table, the plates rattling in protest. Helen flinched, her eyes wide with shock and hurt. I had never raised my voice to her, not in all our years together. I had never shown her this kind of anger. But the shame, the helplessness had turned me into a different man. I was no longer the proud, quiet veteran she had married. I was a man consumed by his own failures. I got up from the table, my meal unfinished, and walked to the living room. I sat on the old porch swing, now a symbol of all that had been lost, and stared out into the darkness. The street was quiet, but I knew the quiet was a lie. I could feel their presence, the cold, unyielding stare of Officer Carter, and the silent, complicit nod of Officer Davis. The lie had not bought us peace. It had only bought us a deeper, more profound loneliness. I was alone with my fear. I was alone with my shame. I was alone in my home, a prisoner of my own making, and the man I had once been, the man who had promised to protect his family, was now a distant, painful memory. The lie I had told David, the fragile peace I had tried to maintain with Helen, all of it, came crashing down on a Tuesday afternoon. The sun was out, bright and unyielding, but its light was a cold, cruel mockery of warmth. I was standing in the kitchen washing a coffee mug when I heard it, the slow, deliberate crunch of tires on our gravel driveway. My stomach twisted into a familiar knot. It was them. I walked to the window, pulling back the curtain a fraction of an inch, my heart hammering against my ribs. It was Officer Carter. He was alone today, a subtle change that felt more menacing than having his partner with him. He got out of his car, his movements slow and casual, as if he were just a neighbor stopping by. He was not. He walked up to the edge of our driveway, his eyes fixed on Helen's prize rose bush, the one she had nurtured for years, the one whose delicate pink blooms were a point of pride in our quiet, dignified world. The gnome she had painted sat cheerfully at its base. I held my breath, a profound, terrible premonition settling over me. I knew what he was going to do. I could see it in the way he walked, the way his jaw was set, the way his hands were balled into fists at his sides. This wasn't a security check. This wasn't a power play. This was personal. This was a direct, calculated attack on our home, on our peace, on the very soul of Helen's joy. He walked past the rose bush, then stopped. He turned slowly and looked directly at the window where I was hiding. He didn't smile. He just stared, his eyes holding a look of cold, unblinking malice. He knew I was there. He knew I was watching. Then, with a single vicious movement, he reached down and kicked the terracotta pot that held Helen's favorite rose bush. The pot shattered the sound, a sharp, sickening crack that cut through the silence of our street. The soil spilled out a dark, rich earth, now a messy smear on our clean driveway. The rose bush, a symbol of so much love and care, was now a broken, mangled ruin. He didn't say a word. He didn't even look at the gnome. He just stood there for a moment, looking at the broken pot, then looked up at my window again, his eyes holding a look of absolute triumph. Then he got back in his car and drove away, leaving behind the shattered pieces of Helen's garden and the shattered pieces of my pride. I stood there for a long time, frozen, unable to move. A part of me wanted to run outside to scream, to challenge him. The old Marine in me, the part of me that had always fought for what was right, wanted to stand my ground and defend my home. But the new me, the man who had been consumed by shame and helplessness, knew that it would only make things worse. I would be arrested. Helen would be alone. The spiral of harassment would only get deeper, more violent. So I stood there, a silent, helpless witness to the destruction of our world. Helen found me there, still staring at the mess. Her face when she saw the broken pot was a mask of shock and then of pain. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just walked out to the driveway, her movements slow and deliberate, and stood there looking at her broken rosebush. She reached down her hand, trembling, and picked up a single perfect bloom that had broken off in the attack. She held it in her hand, and in that single heartbreaking gesture, I saw all the love and all the care she had poured into her garden. And I saw all the pain that one man's hatred had caused. She walked back inside, her face, a hard, determined mask I had never seen before. She didn't look at me. She walked straight to the bedroom, and I heard the faint sound of her closing the door. A moment later, I heard her voice, low and hushed, but with a new, fierce quality I had never heard before. She was on the phone. I stood there listening, a profound sense of dread settling over me. Who was she calling? Was she calling a neighbor? The police. A wave of panic washed over me. I couldn't let her do that. I couldn't let her make things worse. But then I heard the name. David. The name came out of her lips, a fragile whisper that carried all the love and all the fear in her heart. I walked closer to the door, my heart pounding in my ears. I listened to my body, a statue of shame and fear. "He's fine, baby," she said, her voice trembling. "He's fine, but we're not. They're not going away. They come by every day now. The young one. He's so angry. He broke my rose bush, David. My beautiful rose bush." I heard her voice crack, and a fresh wave of tears started to run down my face. She was crying now, a low, guttural sob that was filled with a lifetime of unspoken fear. "He's been so quiet, baby. So quiet and so sad," she said, her voice now a torrent of raw, unfiltered emotion. "He won't talk to me. He won't talk to anyone. He's so ashamed, David. He feels so helpless. He told you everything was fine, but that was a lie. He didn't want to worry you. He didn't want to show you how weak he feels." The words hit me like a physical blow. She was laying it all out. All the shame, all the helplessness, all the lies I had told David. The wall I had built around myself, around my family, was coming crashing down. He needs you, baby, she said, her voice now a desperate, heartbreaking plea. He needs his son. We need you. Please, David, please. We're so scared. We don't know what to do. And then she hung up. The silence that followed was a different kind of quiet. It was no longer filled with fear, but with a profound, terrifying certainty. The secret was out. The lie was gone. The burden was no longer mine to bear alone. But a new, more terrifying reality had taken its place. David knew. Helen walked out of the bedroom, her eyes red and puffy, but with a newfound resolve on her face. She looked at me, and I saw a strange mixture of love, fear, and defiance in her gaze. I called him, she said, her voice soft but firm. I told him everything. I couldn't watch you suffer anymore, Bill. I couldn't stand it. He needs to know. He needs to help us. I just nodded, unable to speak. The shame was still there, but it was now mixed with a profound sense of relief. The secret was no longer a burden. The lie was no longer a poison. I walked over to her and wrapped my arms around her, holding her tightly. She was trembling, but her hand when she took mine was steady and firm. The fight was no longer mine alone. The helplessness was gone, replaced by a new fragile hope. The storm was coming, but this time we would not face it alone. My son was coming home. The world, which had been so small and confined to our fears, was about to expand. I was standing in the living room, still trembling from the sight of Helen's broken rose bush, when I heard the sound again. It was the same car, the same low, malevolent hum of the engine as it pulled to a stop at the curb. This time, they didn't bother with the subtle pretense of a security check. Officer Carter and Officer Davis stepped out of their car, their faces set in a grim, determined scowl. They were back, and this time I knew it would be worse. Officer Carter held a manila folder in his hand, a prop in this final act of intimidation. He walked with a heavy, purposeful gait, his eyes fixed on our front door. He didn't even knock this time. He just started to bang on the wood with the palm of his hand, a series of hard, vicious thuds that rattled the windows and shook the very foundation of our home. "Open up, Johnson!" He bellowed, his voice raw with anger and frustration. "We know you're in there. We've got a warrant this time. Open the damn door!" Helen's hand, which had been resting on my arm, tightened into a frantic grip. Her breath was coming in short, sharp gasps, and her eyes were wide with a terror that mirrored my own. I stood there frozen, the old veteran who had faced down storms and hostile forces, now just an old man who was afraid in his own home. I was a failure. And then I heard it. A different sound. The sound of a car pulling up behind the police cruiser. It was a new sound, an unknown sound. It wasn't the slow, malevolent hum of their car. It was the quiet, precise click of an engine turning off. I heard the slam of a car door, firm and deliberate. A voice calm and steady cut through the tension. "Officers, is there a problem here?" The voice was deep and resonant, a sound that sent a jolt of recognition and pure, unadulterated relief through my system. Officer Carter stopped his pounding and turned his face a mask of annoyance that quickly shifted to surprise. He was looking at a tall, broad-shouldered man in a crisp, immaculate dress uniform. His chest was covered in ribbons and medals I didn't recognize. His posture was ramrod straight, his expression calm and unyielding. It was my son. My son David was home. My heart gave a painful lurch of joy and fear. He was here. He had come home. He had heard his mother's call. He was a symbol of strength and defiance in a world that had become so small and so terrifying. David walked toward the officers, his movements as precise and deliberate as a dancer's. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He just walked, a calm and unwavering presence that seemed to fill the street. He stopped a few feet from the police car, his hands clasped behind his back, a picture of quiet authority. Officer Carter, who had been a lion in his own den, was now a confused, nervous kitten. He looked at David's uniform, at the look of cold, controlled certainty on his face, and his bluster faltered. "Who the hell are you?" He stammered, the bravado in his voice replaced by a nervous uncertainty. "My name is Captain David Johnson," my son said, his voice a low, steady command. "United States Marine Corps, and this is my home. These are my parents. Now you tell me, is there a problem here?" The shift in power was immediate and absolute. Officer Carter's face flushed with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. He was no longer the man in charge. He was just a local cop out of his depth and out of his league. He looked at Officer Davis, who just shrugged his face, a picture of weary resignation. "We have a warrant." Carter said, his voice now a little too high, a little too defensive. "We've had reports of illegal activity at this residence. We've got a right to be here." David just looked at him, a look of profound disbelief on his face. "A warrant for what? For a broken rose bush? For a garden gnome, you tell me, officer? What illegal activity have my 70-year-old parents been engaging in?" At Sapwall. He took a step closer, his eyes locked on Officer Carter's. "You have no warrant. You have no right to be here. This is a clear case of harassment, and I will not stand for it. You will leave now, and you will not come back. Do you understand?" Officer Carter's mouth opened and closed a fish out of water. He wanted to shout. He wanted to bluster. But he couldn't. He was up against a force he had never encountered before, a man who was not afraid of him. A man who had more authority, more power, and more control than he could ever hope to have. "I will be filing a formal complaint with your precinct," David said, his voice now a low, chilling whisper. "I will be sending a copy to the mayor's office. I will be speaking to your internal affairs. You two have just picked a fight with the wrong family." The threat was so clear, so precise, so utterly believable, that it took all the fight out of Officer Carter. He looked at David, then at me, standing in the doorway, a look of profound defeat on his face. He knew he had lost. He turned and walked back to his car, his swagger gone, his shoulders slumped in resignation. Officer Davis, who had stood silently through the whole exchange, just shook his head and followed him. They got in their cars, and with a low, defeated whine, they drove away, the flashing lights no longer a symbol of menace, but a symbol of their retreat. The street was silent again, but this time it was a different kind of quiet. A quiet filled with a profound, breathtaking relief. I stood there in the doorway looking at my son. He was still standing in the middle of our driveway, his posture ramrod straight, a sentinel guarding our home. He was the boy who used to build sandcastles. He was the boy who had told me his secrets. And he was also a man, a soldier, a protector who had come home to save us. He turned and walked toward the house, his face softening as he came closer. The calm professional demeanor was replaced by a look of love and concern. He looked at me, his eyes full of a love that was so powerful, so pure, that it took my breath away. He walked to the door, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the profound, comforting reality of his presence. He was home. We were no longer alone. The fight was not over, but for the first time in a long time, I was not afraid. He was here. The front door of our home had never felt so safe. Helen and I stood just inside our bodies, trembling with a mixture of terror and overwhelming relief. The two officers, Carter and Davis, were still outside, their presence a lingering, malevolent storm cloud. They were defeated, their authority shattered by my son's calm, unwavering presence, but they were not yet gone. Officer Carter, in particular, looked like a coiled snake, his face a mask of impotent rage. David, however, was not concerned with their rage. He was a professional. He turned to me and Helen, a soft, reassuring smile on his face. "Go inside, Dad. Mom, I'll handle this. It's just a matter of documentation now." He pulled out his smartphone, a sleek, modern device, and began to record. He held it up, making sure the camera was clearly visible to the two officers, a simple, non-confrontational act that was in itself a powerful challenge. "Officers, I'm now recording this interaction for the record," he said, his voice as calm and professional as if he were giving a briefing. "I'll need your full names, badge numbers, and the precise reason for your presence here today." Carter's face, already flushed with anger, turned a deeper shade of red. He took a step forward, his jaw clenched, his eyes a cold, hard stare. "You think you're smart, boy, recording us? That's not going to do you any good. Impersonating an officer is a federal crime." David just looked at him, a look of profound disbelief on his face. "I'm not impersonating an officer, Officer Carter. My name is Captain David Johnson, United States Marine Corps. This is my home. I am a commissioned officer of the United States Armed Forces. The last time I checked, that was not a crime. And I'm not here to play games. I'm here to ensure the safety and well-being of my parents. Now, once again, your names and badge numbers. Or I can call the precinct and get them myself. It's up to you." The bluff, the threat, the very audacity of the situation had taken all the fight out of Carter. He looked at David, then at me standing in the doorway, a look of pure, impotent rage on his face. He wanted to bluster. He wanted to shout, but he couldn't. He was up against a man who was not only his equal, but his superior in every way. Officer Davis, who had been standing silently in the background, finally spoke. "Carter, let it go. He's got us. It's not worth it." Carter ignored him. He looked at David again, his eyes a cold, unwavering stare. "You think you're hot stuff because you got a uniform on? You think you're the law around here? You're not. We are. And we'll be back. You can't be here forever. This isn't over." David just smiled, a small, cold, professional smile that sent a shiver down my spine. "You're right, Officer Carter. It's not over. It's just beginning. But the next time you come to this house, you'll be dealing with me. And I will have a lawyer. And I will have this video. And I will have a formal complaint in your file that will make your life a living hell. Now I suggest you take your defeated self and your baseless threats and leave our property." The words, so calmly and precisely delivered, were a final crushing blow. Carter's shoulders slumped in defeat. He looked at Officer Davis, who just shook his head. They both knew they had lost. They turned, and without another word, they walked to their cars, their once confident swagger replaced by a dejected, sullen walk. They got in their cars, and with a low, defeated whine, they drove away, leaving behind them a quiet that was finally truly peaceful. I just stood there in the doorway, watching them go. The shame, the helplessness, the fear that had been my constant companion for weeks was now gone, replaced by a profound, breathtaking relief. David walked back to the house, his face softening as he came closer. He was no longer the soldier, the man of authority. He was my son. He walked into the living room, and for the first time in a long time, the room felt safe. He pulled Helen and me into a hug, a warm, powerful embrace that was filled with all the love and all the gratitude in his heart. "It's okay, Mom. It's okay, Dad. I'm home. I'm here." After the hug, he sat us down on the couch, his face now a mask of serious determination. "I need you to tell me everything," he said, his voice low and calm. "Everything. From the first time they showed up to the last. Every detail, every word. Don't leave anything out." And so we did. Helen, her voice still trembling a little, and I, my voice now strong and steady, told him everything. We told him about the subtle threats, the veiled racism, the broken rosebush, the shame, the helplessness, the lie. We told him about the way our quiet life had been turned into a living hell. We laid it all out, a painful, raw confession that was also a profound act of trust. David listened, his face grim, his eyes burning with a cold, righteous anger I had never seen before. He took notes on his phone, every detail, every word, every lie. When we were finished, he just sat there for a moment, the silence between us a heavy, thoughtful presence. "Okay," he said, his voice calm and deliberate. "We're going to get justice. We're going to make sure this never happens again. We're going to file a formal complaint with their department. We're going to get a lawyer. And we're going to make sure that those two officers never harass another person again. This is not over." And in that moment I knew. The fight was not over. But it was no longer my fight alone. It was a fight for our family, for our dignity, for our peace. And we had a champion, a Marine, a man who was not afraid, a man who would not back down, a man who would not rest until justice was served. The shame was gone. The helplessness was gone. The fear was gone, replaced by a profound, breathtaking sense of pride. My son was home. And we were safe. The silence that followed the departure of the police cars was a heavy, emotional presence. It was no longer a silence filled with fear, but a silence filled with a profound sense of relief, gratitude, and a new kind of tension. The fight was over for now, but the deeper battle, the battle for my family's emotional well-being, had just begun. David, no longer in his uniform, was sitting on the couch, his posture still straight and firm, but his expression was soft. His eyes filled with a concern that was both comforting and a little intimidating. Helen and I were sitting across from him in our old worn armchairs. The room felt small, and the air was thick with the weight of unspoken words. The video on David's phone was the silent witness to our trauma, a cold, hard piece of evidence that was now sitting on the coffee table. David looked at me, his gaze steady and unwavering. "Dad," he said, his voice low and calm, "I need you to tell me something. I need you to be honest with me. Why didn't you tell me what was happening?" The question, so simple and so direct, felt like a blow to my chest. The shame I had been carrying for weeks, the shame I had tried to hide, to bury, to pretend didn't exist, was now out in the open. It was a raw, painful, unbearable thing. I looked at him, at the man he had become, at the man who had just saved us, and I felt a profound sense of failure. My voice, when it came, was a choked, guttural sound, filled with a lifetime of unspoken pride and unspoken pain. I'm so sorry, son. I'm so sorry. The tears, which I had held back for weeks now, came in a torrent. They ran down my face, hot and salty, a river of shame and regret. I covered my face with my hands, my body trembling with a profound, soul-deep sorrow. I had always been the strong one, the one who solved problems, the one who protected, and in a moment of crisis I had failed. I had lied. I had failed to protect my wife, and I had failed to trust my son. Helen was at my side in a moment, her hand on my shoulder, a small, comforting presence. I heard David's chair scrape against the floor. He walked over to me, and he didn't say a word. He just knelt down in front of me, and he pulled my hands away from my face. He looked at me, and his eyes, so full of a love that was so pure and so true, were also filled with a pain that mirrored my own. "Dad," he said, his voice a low, steady whisper. "Don't you ever say that. Don't you ever apologize to me." He put his arms around me, a warm, powerful embrace that was so full of love and so full of forgiveness that it felt like a healing balm on my soul. He held me tightly, and I buried my face in his chest, the scent of his uniform, of clean, starched cloth, and of the man he had become, a powerful, comforting presence. I felt the shame begin to melt away, replaced by a profound sense of relief, and a love that was so pure and so true that it took my breath away. "You are protecting me," he said, his voice a gentle murmur in my ear. I get it, Dad. You're a protector. It's who you are. It's what you've always done. But you have to let me protect you too. You have to let me be your son. You have to let me be a part of your life, the good and the bad. You don't have to carry the world on your shoulders anymore. You have me. You have us." He pulled away and looked at me, his eyes now glistening with tears of his own. "You are the strongest man I know, Dad. You fought a war. You raised a family. You're a good man. You're a hero to me. Don't you ever forget that." The words, so simple and so pure, were a profound, breathtaking gift. They were the redemption I had been so desperately searching for. The fight against the cops was just a symptom of a deeper wound, a wound of distance and of unspoken pain. And in that moment, in the warmth of my son's embrace, that wound began to heal. Helen, who had been standing silently beside me now, put her hand on David's shoulder. "He's a good man, baby. A good man. He just loves you so much." David smiled, a genuine, heartbreakingly beautiful smile that reached his eyes. He stood up, and he pulled Helen into his arms, holding her tightly, his head resting on her shoulder. "I know, Mom. I know. I love you both so much." The three of us stood there in the middle of our living room, a family finally reunited, finally healed. The cracks that had been caused by the harassment, the emotional distance, the unspoken fears were now being mended. We talked for hours. We talked about his life, his work, the things he had seen, the people he had met. We talked about our life, our fears, our quiet joys, our loneliness. The wall between us, the wall that had been built of pride and of fear, was gone. Later that evening, after a long, hard day of emotional turmoil, David and I walked out to the porch. We sat on the old porch swing, the one that had been the soundtrack of my lonely mornings, the one that had been a silent witness to my fears. The sun was setting, a warm, golden glow spreading over our street. The street was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet. A quiet filled with a new hope, a new peace. He didn't say a word. He just sat there, his arm resting on the back of the swing. His presence a comforting, powerful anchor in my life. I looked at him, at the man he had become, and I saw a reflection of myself. A man of honor. A man of duty. A man who was fiercely loyal and deeply in love with his family. The shame was gone. The helplessness was gone. The fear was gone, replaced by a profound, breathtaking sense of pride, and a love that was so pure and so true that it felt like a healing balm on my soul. My son was home. And for the first time in a long time, the world felt right again. A few months had passed. The leaves on the trees had turned from the vibrant green of summer to the rich, fiery hues of autumn. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of wood smoke and a new kind of peace. The quiet of our street, once a source of loneliness, then a symbol of terror, was now a true, genuine peace. It was a peace we had fought for, and it was a peace we had won. The legal process had moved with a swiftness that was both surprising and gratifying. David had been a force of nature. He had filed the formal complaint, provided the video evidence, and with the help of a pro bono lawyer from the Marine Corps, he had ensured that our case was heard. The city faced with an undeniable video of an officer's blatant harassment, and a well-respected Marine Corps officer on the other side had acted swiftly. Officers Carter and Davis were suspended from duty, their careers in law enforcement effectively over. We had received a formal apology from the police chief himself, a hollow bureaucratic statement that meant nothing to me. The only apology that mattered was the one I had received from my own son, the one I had given to him, and the one we had given to each other, a profound and simple act of love and forgiveness that had healed a wound far deeper than any injustice could ever inflict. Life had slowly, almost imperceptibly, returned to normal, but it wasn't the old normal. It was a new normal, a better normal. The fear was gone. The loneliness was gone. The quiet of our home, of our street, was now a source of profound, breathtaking joy. We were no longer victims. We were survivors, and we were whole again. The porch swing, which had been a silent witness to so much of our pain, was now a place of profound happiness. I sat on it, a blanket wrapped around my knees, the warm sun of a late autumn afternoon on my face. The chain creaked a familiar, comforting tune, but this time it was a sound of contentment, not a sound of loneliness. Helen was in the garden, her hands in the soil, tending to the new rose bush we had planted in the place of the old one. It was a young bush, a single perfect bud, just beginning to unfurl, a symbol of our new beginning. David was with her, his strong hands helping her, his voice, a low, steady murmur of love and support. He was home. He was a part of our life again. He had extended his leave, a decision that had surprised and delighted us. "I'm not leaving until I know you guys are okay." He had set a look of profound determination on his face, and he had stayed. He had spent his days mending our fence, helping Helen in the garden, and just being with us. His presence was a tangible physical presence of love and security that had healed us in a way that no apology or legal victory ever could. I watched him now, his head bent over the young rose bush, a look of fierce concentration on his face. He was not a soldier now. He was a son, a man who was fiercely loyal and deeply in love with his family. Helen was talking to him, her voice filled with a joy that had been so absent from our lives just a few months ago. She was laughing, a sound that was so beautiful and so pure that it brought a smile to my face. David looked up, and he saw me. He smiled, a wide, genuine smile that reached his eyes, a smile that was not the smile of a soldier on a mission, but the smile of a boy who was happy to be home. He waved to me, and I waved back, a simple gesture of love and connection that was more meaningful than any words. He walked over to the porch, his face still flushed with the warmth of the sun. He sat down next to me on the swing, his weight a comfortable, reassuring presence. The swing creaked under his weight, a gentle, rhythmic sound. "How are you doing, Dad?" he asked, his voice low and calm. "I'm good, son," I said, my voice filled with a profound sense of gratitude. "I'm real good." We sat there for a long time, not saying a word, just sitting in the quiet of the afternoon. The silence was not a silence of absence. It was a silence filled with a profound, beautiful love. It was a silence filled with the unspoken words of a father and a son who had found their way back to each other. It was a silence filled with the knowledge that we were whole again. I looked at him, at his strong, handsome face, at the man he had become. The fear was gone. The shame was gone. The loneliness was gone, replaced by a profound, breathtaking sense of pride and a love that was so pure and so true that it felt like a healing balm on my soul. My son was home, and for the first time in a long time, the world felt right again. I looked out at the street, at the peaceful, quiet houses, at the children playing in the distance. The world was not perfect. There would always be prejudice. There would always be hatred. There would always be injustice. But I knew with a terrible certainty that it would never be able to reach us again. Not as long as we were together. Not as long as we had each other. I leaned back on the swing, my head resting on the old familiar wood. The sun was setting, a warm golden glow spreading over our street, painting the world in a warm, beautiful light. The silence was perfect. The moment was perfect. And I knew with a profound, soul-deep certainty that this was not just an end to our ordeal. This was a new beginning. A new beginning for my family. A new beginning for me. And it was a beginning that was filled with a peace that was more beautiful, more precious, and more real than anything I had ever known.